In this quick tip, I'm going to show you how to set up and use a UV grid tile and texture to apply onto your meshes to help you improve UVing. So here's what usually happens. Once you are ready to UV, you open up the UV editor and begin UVing your object by enabling a checker pattern material. This one right here inside the UV editor. This gives you a checker pattern and you can kind of fly around the object to see what needs to be UV'd, where the stretching is, where the distortion is, the textile density, and so on, in order to get to the final result, which is this one right here. Everything is nice and even, you get to see all the squares, and the checker pattern is properly laid out, and there's no distortion, no stretching, the textile density is correct, and all the UV shells are oriented correctly. However, using this default checker pattern is not very intuitive and it's not very good. And I don't like using it because there are a few problems with it. First of all, I have to select the object in order to see it. Second, I can't really tell if some of these UVs are upside down, if the shells are oriented correctly. There is a text here on the side you can see, so that could help you, but it doesn't appear on all of the shells. And there are a few options you can enable to help you with this, such as this shaded view, so you can see the flipped UV shells. But overall, it's still not very user-friendly, and I don't like using this. Instead, I have a set of UV grid textures. These right here that I use instead. These are tile and textures, 1024 by 1024, and I simply create a material and assign one of these UV grid textures to use, then apply that material onto a mesh. And these are far more superior to use to help you improve your UVing and to speed up the UVing process workflow. So let me show you how to set this up. First of all, you need one of these textures to use. And if you want all of these, I've put them up on WOOD Patreon, so you can go ahead and download them and use any of these. And there's a link in the description or within the blog post for you to grab them. Then choose the one that you want. My favorite ones is this UV Grid, the first one, and then also this last one, UV Grid 7. Go ahead, select them. You just need one and copy them into your project directory. And it has to be your Maya project directory into the source images folder. And here they are. I pasted both of them into the project directory, into the source images folder. Very important that you place them here. Next up in Maya, let's go ahead and create a material. So I'm going to go to Hypershade, this icon right here at the very top. And we're going to create a simple Lambert material. We already have Lambert 1, but you want another one that we can assign that texture onto, because you always want to have your default Lambert 1 available to you. I'm going to click on Lambert right here to create a second one. I can rename it if I want by selecting it, and let's rename it here. Let's keep Lambert 2 as a name and just add UV Grid. But you can rename it to anything you want by removing that Lambert 2. Next, under color, let me move this closer right here. Under color, click on this checker box. Create render node will pop up and you want to choose file. This assigns a file node, but right now it's empty. And you can see it's being selected. We have our property editor window come up and you want to click on the folder under image name right here. It's going to take you into the project directory, into the source images folder. This is why we copied the UV grids in here. And then choose the UV grid you want to use. Let's go ahead and use UV grid 7 and click open. We now have our material with the UV grid texture applied. We can now close this. Next is we need to assign that material onto our mesh. To do this, you can reopen the Hypershade and drag it, middle mouse click and drag on your meshes. But another way is simply select your mesh, right click hold, and actually let me go ahead and disable the checker map default one inside the UV editor so we no longer see it. So with the mesh selected, right click on the mesh, go down to assign existing material and choose a Lambert 2 UV grid or whatever UV grid material you have. And we have assigned it. You're not going to see it because you have to enable texture view, shortcut key 6. You can also come up to the toolbar right here in the viewport toolbar and enable this textured icon. This will toggle the visibility of the material on or off. And let's go ahead and apply the same material onto the finished mesh. Right click hold, assign existing material, UV grid. And you can see that this UV grid texture already gives you far better view for what you need to UV, how the shells appear, what their textile density is, if they are flipped, if they are correctly oriented, rather than using this checker material. And now I can take a look at the mesh, see what needs to be adjusted, see what needs to be oriented correctly, maybe rotated, maybe flipped, and of course, which shells need to have correct textile density so they all match. And I can see the numbers and it appears on every single UV shell. So this is far more superior method of helping you UV your meshes rather than using the checker pattern. Few more key things. If you want to get the shaded view, make sure you have the UV editor open and click 5. So 4 is the wireframe, 5 is the shaded view. And if you have any shells that are flipped, they will appear red. So let me select the shell. So if I flip it, This is another way to help you along with this UV grid texture to see which UV shells need to be flipped or rotated. So I recommend using these UV grid textures instead of the default checker pattern. And again, you can grab a bunch of these different UV grid textures to use on WOLD Patreon. And if you want to learn more on how to actually UV using all these UV tools inside Maya, take a look at Maya Foundation Home Study course. And in Module 3, we'll go into depth and I show you everything you need to know for how to begin to UV your objects using the UV editor.